Hey everyone, this is Stacey Lindis from Podcast PD, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual host. Make sure you check out all of the other great podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com and get ready because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
Support for this episode of the House of EdTech comes from my awesome supporters. If you're interested in becoming an awesome supporter, go to chrisnessy.com/awesome. Coming up in this episode, it is the Not at ISTE 2018 Keynote. Let's do it. Welcome to the House of EdTech podcast. I am your host, Chris Nessy. The House of EdTech explores how technology is changing the way teachers teach and the impact that technology is having in education. I discuss technology that is changing our classrooms and schools, and I share tools and tips that you can hear today and use tomorrow. You're going to hear the stories of teachers, leaders, and creators just like you. The purpose? Whether you use it or not, technology is changing the way you teach and how your students learn. Hey, welcome back to the House of EdTech. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad that you make this podcast part of your anytime, anywhere professional development. This is a very awesome episode that I've sort of been planning since December of 2017. And as you can see by the title and the quick intro just a few seconds ago, this episode is my Not at ISTE 2018 Keynote, which is very exciting. This episode will not contain two regular segments. There is no EdTech recommendation, and there is no EdTech thought. I wanted to devote all of this to really the whole thing as one giant EdTech thought, because ISTE is all about education and the intersection with technology, and that's coming up at the end of June 2018. You know, I've got this podcast. I've had it since January of 2014, and I've always used this podcast as a platform to, one, learn. That's been my first priority. And two, throughout bits and pieces to share my opinion on any number of topics related to education, technology, and other parts. So this episode contains what I have designed as a keynote speech presentation, minus the visuals. So it's purely audio, as only I can do it. So if this is your first time, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And if you're a long-time listener, obviously this episode has a little bit of a different feel. Now, before I share my keynote, I want to wish all of you dads and important male role models a happy Father's Day, just to date this episode. And to my dad, John Nessy, thank you for always being a part of my life and being there for me when I needed you and when I didn't think I needed you as well. The words I'm about to share are words I'm very excited to share. Giving this address fits right in with my usual MO for this podcast. Nobody asked for it, and yet here it is, and thousands of you love the podcast, and I have no regrets. So I'm really looking forward to sharing my first keynote, which is exciting. Again, self-proclaimed. I've never seen this done before, so why not? If you like it, please share it. As soon as it's done, go out on social media, choose your favorite platform of choice, and share this episode using hashtag ISTE and hashtag Not at ISTE, and use the appropriate year. Whether it's Not at ISTE 18, Not at ISTE 2018, ISTE 18, ISTE 2018. So many hashtags, one fantastic event. And I thank you in advance for amplifying my voice. And now, I present to you my 2018 Not at ISTE Keynote. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me here at Not at ISTE. I'm very excited for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to making the most of the next few minutes. Why am I here? The purpose of what I'm about to talk about is to foster continued excitement and enthusiasm for effective and relevant education technology integration in classrooms and schools. To me, it seems pretty simple. In 2017, Education Week reported that public schools were spending over $3 billion, with a B, $3 billion per year on digital education content. That is certainly an ungodly amount of money. And the money spent in education will certainly continue to rise. Let me share a story. In the spring of 2008, I signed my first teacher contract. I was hired as a long-term replacement social studies teacher in a middle school in Central Jersey. At this point in my life, I was newly married, and I had just finished my student teaching experience in the fall of 2007. And I achieved my long-time dream of becoming a social studies teacher. Back in 2008, I was so excited to have my 8th grade students sign up for Gmail accounts and integrate Google Docs into my classroom. Parents were thrilled that their sons and daughters didn't need USB drives or disks to take work back and forth between school and home. Group projects didn't mean having to coordinate who can get to someone's house or everybody meeting up at the library on a Saturday. Tools like Glogster were king for my students, and I recall explaining to 8th graders that Twitter was not for old people and that it would be a powerful social media platform. Life was good. My enthusiasm for education technology and my now defunct History the Nessie Way blog were supercharged and ready to change the lives of students. The heart of my classroom has always been, though I didn't know it then, was creativity. And coming in a close second, and they might as well have been 1A and 1B, collaboration and communication. Let's talk about collaboration and communication. You don't need me to tell you that communication is important. We know this. Let's consider it a fact or a given. Why do so many people struggle with basic communication? I think fear is a big part of why we struggle with communication. Think of how excited you are when you have to call home about a student with news or an update that isn't great. Or when your principal calls you to their office with little more than the sentence, "Come to my office." We're not excited at all for either of those conversations. Your initial thought is, this parent is going to berate me, and I won't have their support for, fill in the blank, whatever the situation is. Or the principal wants to see me, and then you start to play back the last few days or week in your mind to think about something you could have done to be in trouble for. So there are certain fears we have when it comes to communicating. We're afraid of being rejected if we put ourselves out there, or being confronted, or being called out for what we believe in, and then having to defend ourselves. Our students feel all of these emotions as well. But there's a difference, and we don't quite know how to describe it other than using phrases like, "kids today," "when I was a kid or a student." We believe that the current generation always has it easier than when we did when we were young. I know there are teachers who are trying to strengthen our students' communication skills. But what are you doing? I can only speak for me and what I try to instill in my students. I want my students to know they have a voice, and I want them to be more effective communicators who aren't afraid to speak up for themselves. Let me share a quick story about my own son, who is 6, and he's getting ready to enter 1st grade. Let me first say that he is never quiet. From the moment he wakes up until he passes out at bedtime, he's the epitome of a 6-year-old. He never stops moving, and he never stops talking. And he's always been this way. When he was in pre-K, he would occasionally take the bus home from school. The bus was for pre-K students only. Well, twice, he wasn't dropped off at his stop, and he proceeded to get a tour of the town. The first time, the driver and bus aide realized he was still on the bus and got him back to the bus stop within, 5 or 10 minutes. The second time, they went on a whole other bus run with children from different schools in the district and didn't realize he was on the bus until they were at the last school. My wife and I didn't know where he was for almost an hour. I don't need to explain our emotions at that point. To tie this in, when we asked our son why he didn't speak up, he said he didn't want to be rude and interrupt the driver and the aide who were talking with each other. We were beside ourselves. Here is our little motor mouth choosing the wrong time to show good manners. Since that time, we've made a conscious effort to make sure our 6-year-old and our soon-to-be 3-year-old begin to understand advocating for themselves and to empower them even as children. How are your students learning to advocate for themselves and to be better communicators? Technology is such a huge part of our lives, but I think we need to go back the other way a little bit. I know, ironic considering this is a technology time of year, ISTE, the whole thing. We've got adults and a generation of people who can't sustain a lengthy face-to-face conversation. Faces buried in screens, ears clogged with earbuds, social media that has altered the fabric of our social lives. Encourage your students to engage in actual face-to-face conversation. Give them time to simply talk to each other. Perhaps provide a topic of discussion, or, better yet, let them figure out what to talk to each other about. Teach them to advocate for themselves and positively confront adverse situations. How many of your students leave your classroom unable to navigate a disagreement with another human being? How are we modeling effective communication and collaboration for students? We've all seen articles and read things that talk about how we only share the best parts of our lives, and if you share the negative, you risk being called out for it, or worse. Social media for us as teachers is so powerful, but it's always positive. I've seen more and more people try to share more authentic truths, and the quote-unquote experts respond with the need to keep the space positive. Well, I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry, not sorry. But life and this profession is not always sunshine and rainbows. I'm seeing more and more Twitter chats recycling the same old topics. How many times do we need to define project-based learning? Or figure out what being a connected educator means? Where and when can we participate in the #teaching-is-hard chat? More authentic conversation will lead to more authentic teaching. How can we grow the number of teachers who are sharing and connecting? I'll be honest, I don't have the answers, though I wish I did. Better communication will lead to more effective collaboration. Great. We have this tool and that Google fill in the blank to chat in and type in. But so many students and adults don't come close to harnessing the power of true collaboration. I'm not saying I'm perfect by any stretch. Believe me, I'm not. But I do understand what it means to be a team player. It's the little things. And I will borrow from Simon Sinek, and this can be applied to anyone, anywhere. Sinek has talked about the need to care for the people around us, and that if you ask someone how they are doing, you better be prepared to actually engage them on the topic and be ready to listen. In education, this would go a long way to eliminate and simply not blur the line that exists between teachers and administrators. How many of you have ever written an email to a colleague and your just sent message went into the abyss and you never received a response or even an acknowledgement? We've all been there. We've all done this too many times, and I will admit that I ignore emails from time to time as well. And I'm sorry if I've ignored emails that you've sent me. If we can get back to the basics of communication and respect for others, we can continue to grow as collaborators and sharers of ideas and knowledge. I intentionally saved creation for the end because if you take anything away from what I'm saying, let me start with this. You are creative. So all you naysayers who claim to not have a creative bone in your body, knock it off. Everybody is creative to some degree. Just open yourself up to letting creativity flow. Now, I know I'm not someone who should be talking about exercise, but I feel confident in saying that creativity is something we can get better at. You can grow creatively. We know this is true because we see students grow as creators and thinkers all the time. They're human, and surprise, so are we. So why can't a 27, 37, 47, 57, 67-year-old person continue to get creative as time goes on? You would think it would come more naturally as we live our lives and have different experiences, that we would be able to harness these things and creativity would continue to blossom and bloom. People talk about being outside the box thinkers, and as per the norm, talk is cheap. You're afraid. We all have a little George McFly in us, just waiting to realize that if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything, especially with creativity. Think of the most creative person in your life. How often do you speak to them? Have you ever found yourself feeling jealous about what they can do? Have you ever tried to emulate them? Have you truly tried to learn from them? If you have and you're not still successful, you tried. If you've never taken the initiative, you're doing yourself a great disservice. We all know that students' level of creativity is reduced as they move through school. Does it have to be this way? Why aren't we promoting creativity in K-12 education? Now, some of you are, and some of you are really doing a great job. But for many of us, why do we sit back and allow art to become less cool or cut it? And why do we take recess away? Why does school become more like work, starting in like 7th grade? Why do we as teachers seem to be less endearing and caring around that same time, where we have to prepare kids for the real world? In the words of the Joker, why so serious? Did you know that technology doesn't lead to creativity? iPads and Chromebooks don't make our students more creative. We do. Your favorite app could be contributing, but it is not the be-all and end-all for promoting and growing creativity. How can we use technology to enhance and foster creativity? Again, I don't have the answer, but I do have some advice. If you've listened to the podcast before, this will be familiar. Using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try. Let's apply this to creativity and technology. Being creative isn't difficult. You just have to keep trying. I think I nailed it. This whole time I've managed not to recommend any one tool or one way of doing things. This was intentional because I want you to take this same thought process in your schools and classrooms and see what happens. You want your children and students to fly? You've got to give them room to spread their wings. You're a good parent, or you're a good teacher, or both. I would like to leave you with 2 final thoughts of encouragement. Because you've come to expect me to talk about technology, and this is the ISTE time of year, choose one tool that you're very proficient with and teach it to someone who is not, and show them the value and power of how they can use that tool to improve their teaching and their teaching practice, or to use it with students. My second thought, take some time to daydream, because at the very least, you'll wind up taking a nap, and like my own children, only good things can come after we take a little rest. thank you for listening. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my Not at ISTE keynote here for 2018. And now, let's meet this episode's House of EdTech VIP. Time for this episode's House of EdTech VIP. And for this episode, I've been doing this podcast for now 5 years, so this is the 5th Father's Day, and I'm pretty sure that around this time, the last 4 years that I put an episode out around this time of year, I forget to mention dads or acknowledge Father's Day. So to make up for that a little bit, I'd like to salute all of the dads in EdTech. And I'd like to share a poem from poemhunter.com by Damian Murphy. The poem is titled, Thank You, Dad. Thank you, Dad, for everything you have done. Your hard work and sacrifice for everyone. Thanks for everything you continue to do. But most of all, thank you for just being you. Thank you, Dad, for taking time to care. We really appreciate you always being there. At those times when we feel we really need you, you never leave us wanting, always coming through. Thank you, Dad, for being constantly strong, for being such a rock when things go wrong, for making time for us, for always listening to all the various problems we constantly bring. Thank you, Dad, for calming our fears, for soothing words, for wiping tears. Thank you for never letting us give up hope, for convincing us repeatedly we can cope. Thank you for your guidance as we move along, for teaching each one of us right from wrong, for encouraging us always to do the right thing, for the moral compass needed for everyday living. Thank you for your calmness, your infinite patience, your common sense when faced with youthful exuberance. Thank you for providing us with everything we need, for believing in us, giving us tools to succeed. Thank you, Dad, for never giving up on me, for encouraging me to be all that I could be, for your forgiveness when I was an absolute brat, for your direction when I had no clue what I was at. Thank you from my heart for being such a great dad. Thank you for the wonderful upbringing I had. Thank you mostly for teaching me what it means to be a dad. If I am only half as good as you, then my kids won't do so bad. Thank you, dads. You are the House of EdTech VIPs. Thank you for checking out this episode of the House of EdTech podcast. I hope that ISTE 2018 and Not at ISTE provide tremendous value to you that you can bring back to your school or your classroom. Keep the conversation going. Please share this episode of the podcast on social media. Also, you can check out the show notes over at chrisnessy.com/112, and that's 112. Or you can also send a message by going to chrisnessy.com/feedback to let me know your thoughts. If you enjoy the House of EdTech, tell somebody else about the podcast. Share the show, share this episode on social media using the hashtag House of EdTech. Tag me at Mr. Nessie. That would be awesome. You can also become an awesome supporter of the podcast. Many thanks to Eric Kurtz from ControlAltAchieve.com, Dan Gallagher, Peggy George from Classroom 2.0 Live, Jen Giffen from the Shooks and GIF podcast, Mark Grindell, Jeff Herb from InstructionalTechTalk.com, Mike Messner, JP Prezavento, Scott Titmus, and Brent Warner from the EdTech.tv podcast. All of you, thank you for your support. If you're interested in becoming an awesome supporter, head over to chrisnessy.com/awesome. The next episode of the House of EdTech is going to be episode 113. That is going to come out on July 1st, 2018. Kate and I will be back from our well-deserved vacation, and I think I'm going to ask her if she's up for a little education conversation, because many of you repeatedly tell me that this podcast is much better when she's on it. So, I don't really have much else to say. So I'm just going to wrap it up and let you know that until next time, thank you for learning with me. And remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try. The House of EdTech is a proud member of Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right here. For more great content, go to voiceed.ca. The House of EdTech is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. The Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more, go to edupodcastnetwork.com.